Good afternoon and welcome to UK Column Live. I'm Brian Gerrish and I'm going to be interviewing Victoria Ash this afternoon. Vicky, is an SRA survivor. She's a survivor of satanic ritual abuse, and she's kindly agreed to come on a live Skype link to tell her story. What we'd like to achieve together this afternoon is to give people an introduction to SRA. What is it? It's real. People are suffering as a result of it. And through hearing some of Vicky's story, for people to be able to realise that this is a very real problem in the UK. And of course, to do something about it, we need to understand it and recognise it. So let's introduce Vicky. We should have you. We got communications a few minutes ago. Are you there?
I am.
Excellent.
I am.
Okay.
Hello, Brian.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And Vicky, really, it's an open book. We're here to give you the opportunity to speak out on the subject. I think it would be nice if you just started off and sort of introduce yourself and told the viewers and listeners a little bit about yourself. And then you're very welcome to go where you think, well, really where you think you should take people to understand more about SRA. So.
Okay. I'm Victoria Ash. I like to be known as Vicky. I am married with 3 children. I live in Saddleworth. I am now a Christian, and I run a ministry in helping people come out of abuse. And I have been campaigning to expose satanic ritual abuse for the last 26 years. I first went to the police in the early 1990s. Geoffrey Dickens was my MP at the time in Saddleworth, and he helped me and encouraged me to go to the police. But at the time, the case was closed because they said that there was contaminated evidence. I also went on Panorama with Geoffrey Dickens in the 1990s to expose satanic ritual abuse. And as we now see in the media, there is a missing dossier of Geoffrey Dickens where he named perpetrators of satanic ritual abuse. Over the years, I've just been getting on with my life, running a business. I'm a beauty therapist in Saddleworth. I've been raising my children, just getting on with life, but also endeavouring to come to terms with my own past. It's been a long haul to actually come through to freedom as a survivor, because it takes time to face the memories that you've had as a child that you block out, the trauma that you've suffered as a child. But now I can honestly say that I did seek help from church. I'd gone to various therapists, had different counselling, but I did seek help at church, and I can honestly say that today I am free. I don't have any fear of speaking out as a Christian. I believe that the victory is ours. I don't have any fear of speaking out about satanic ritual abuse, and I think that the whole reason that it is, the occult means hidden, and the whole reason that it is hidden is because people have fear to actually speak out about it. But now that I am a Christian, I recognise that, you know, you walk in faith and not fear, and we have the victory. And if I can help one person who it's happened to come forward and prevent it happening to other children, I believe the climate now is right for it to be exposed. We're seeing historical abuse cases in the media. We see the Jimmy Savile. Everything I've talked about for the last 26 years is now in the public arena. And I believe now is the time to actually name it for what it is and do something about it. And it's only when we come together, you know, in numbers and in unity, that there's strength in numbers. Right. And that's why I believe it's right to talk about it, even though it's not a palatable subject. Not an easy subject for people who don't understand to hear about it. And I understand it's very, very sensitive for people who don't understand, but nevertheless, it is the truth. And the truth needs to be exposed.
Right. Vicky, you've already raised so many interesting things there. If I may, just on a bit of background, because of course many people have read about Geoffrey Dickens in the paper. This was the man that took the dossier. That dossier gets lost. You were able to meet him. How old were you when you met him, and what sort of man was he?
Wonderful man, very brave man. It was early 1990s, so I would have been in my early 20s, probably 26, 27. I'm 51 now. So if we do our maths, I was in my 20s. Wonderful man, very supportive, because the main problem with any victim is being believed. When you've gone through the trauma that we suffer, why would you even begin to want to talk about it and tell anybody when you're not believed? But Geoffrey had experience of this. I was linked to Diane Core from Child Watch, whose counsellor supported me, and they also came across other, girls. I can't go into my situation for legal reasons, but everything linked together from other SRA survivors, what had happened to me, and Geoffrey was very, very supportive.
Right.
And I'm very grateful for all that he did when he was alive.
Thank you for telling us that. I'm just going to stay on this point just for a few moments, because of course the BBC in particular has gone to great efforts to discredit Geoffrey Dickinson. There were some pretty appalling articles written. One of the attacks on him is that he was a bit of a buffoon, a bit of a party man. He didn't really understand what he was talking about. You're now telling us that you went to see him with your own case when you were in your mid-20s, so you are an adult going to him. And you're also saying at the time you spoke to him, he'd clearly got other people coming to him. Have you any idea of how many cases he was aware of at the time?
No, he never, obviously there's confidentiality, so he never discussed any other cases with me. But he was because even in those days, to talk about sexual abuse was not a subject you discussed. So, he was very brave. And even, I remember in those days, people said, what's a pedo, they couldn't even say the name paedophile. So we're going back in a time when even sexual abuse was very, very difficult to talk about. And I felt that he was very brave because he did openly, and he was right. Everybody now knows that sexual abuse is a very common problem.
Right, okay. Well, this of course starts to put some foundation to the subject, because, as I said, he has been treated very badly in the press. He's not around to answer for himself, and somebody who you're saying has tried his very best to help, yes, then ridiculed. And we know this is part of the pattern when people try to do something about this subject. So if we...
And also, can I add, Brian, that yeah, I have actually asked Panorama for the actual video of the interview I did with him on Panorama, and nobody seems to be able to get it for me. And I find that quite interesting, because I'd like to be able to see the interview I did. I can talk a little bit about that interview if you'd like. I was asked to go, they said that the actual Panorama interview I went on, they said that it was to help social workers deal, they were getting a bad press for satanic ritual abuse, and that this particular programme was to help them deal with the issue. And then I obviously they came and filmed me, and then I got a phone call warning me that the programme it was deceptive, and it wasn't actually to help the social workers at all. It was saying that satanic ritual abuse wasn't true. So I then phoned up the BBC, and I asked not to be put on the programme, because I said, you've lied to me and said that you're trying to help satanic ritual abuse to be exposed. I said, I found out that you're not. But they still put me on the programme. And even more than that, the victims that were interviewed before me were blacked out. And I'm glad now that I've never been blacked out on anything. I mean, I've spoken on various programs. I'm glad that I've never been blacked out to this day, because I am not afraid. I'm not ashamed either, because, I was a child. There's nothing to be ashamed of. So I'm glad that I haven't been blacked out in that sense. But even so, when I asked Panorama not to put me on the program, they still did. And they didn't black me out.
Well, Vicky, I have to say, from my personal experience, not a subject as serious as yours, but I discovered that the BBC duplicitous in the way that they dealt with people. So I was asked on one particular subject, the subject was common purpose, to give them evidence. They wouldn't come and see me, they hadn't got the time. And then when I did give them evidence, they didn't invite me on their programme, but they had the opposing side, Common Purpose, invited on live. I was just denigrated in the background. So devious behaviour. Can you remember the name of the producer or the director for that Panorama programme?
I'm sure, I think Martin Bashir. I think Martin Bashir was the producer. In fact, I'm sure, because I rang up and asked to speak to him.
Right. And I think we can also say it was interesting, of course, that the BBC originally were definitely going to do a report on the Holly Gregg abuse case up in Scotland. They'd spent time with Holly and her mother, and then all of a sudden the programme was completely cut, and they made excuses which weren't justifiable. Well, that's a very interesting background. Can you start us off somewhere? Many people simply refuse to believe that SRA exists. I've said over the last few weeks, isn't it interesting that the British government back in, I think it was about 2007, said that Satanism was an approved religion, in inverted commas, for use on board British warships, and the BBC was very quick to report that. So if people say, well, Satanism doesn't exist, I simply say, well, you need to have a word with the government and the head of the military. Absolutely. And the BBC. But what can you tell us about this subject to start people off who may feel that this cannot possibly be real?
Satanism is a religion. And now as a Christian, I recognise the Bible to be true, that everything you see in the Old Testament, as we say, it's the same God yesterday, today and forever. It's the same enemy yesterday, today and forever. And the same things, the same practices that went on in the Old Testament, perversion, child sacrifice, idolatry, still goes on today. They have a calendar, dates where they perform rituals as a worship to the devil. They dress up in cloaks. As a child, I was drugged. They use hypnosis and mind control, so that wherever you've been, they take you out to secret locations late at night where they do the rituals, which is their worship to the enemy. And, we see missing children going missing today. There are so many, parallels of unanswered questions for people. And I think this is where the occult means hidden, that these are unanswered questions. But as I've been journeying through to understand what my childhood was about, to understand why did people dress up, why did these things happen to me, not only the truth of me facing my own memories as a child, but the truth of the Bible is that Satan exists. And that's the greatest deception that the devil does, is that he doesn't exist. So that all the bad things that happen, he goes on killing, stealing and destroying lives, being the liar that he is, so that the God who truly loves us gets the blame and our faith is destroyed. And I see over the years, as I've faced the truth, exactly, I didn't understand that it was Satanism that was happening to me. I didn't understand I was sexually abused by my perpetrators. I was burnt, which I now know is branding in Satanism. So all the symptoms I had as a child, it's all you've known as a child. But now I recognise what that was all about. And the fact that they dressed up, it's a religion.
Vicky, for people who have never gone near this subject, I can just add there, of course, if you simply Google Satanism and you Google the Satanic calendar, you can come up with some very informative sites about this and the things that Vicky's started to mention. But a Satanic calendar talking about particular important days for Satanists, and the fact that on those days a variety of rituals are carried out, which may be fairly minor, or they may involve sexual practices or sacrifices of animals or indeed humans. So that information is there on the internet, and I probably should just add, this is the sort of thing that you really need to know why you want to go looking at this material. It's not something for just idle curiosity, and of course this discussion this afternoon is a very serious one. So those practices are there. Should we perhaps also add, Vicky, that of course in Satanic terms, the devil is the bringer of light. He is the one who's actually supposed to be looking after us, informing us, bringing us to knowledge. So there's an inversion in the belief system. Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So can you start us somewhere with what actually happened to you as a child, and how old were you?
I was very young. It started off as normal sexual abuse, but then the memories that I have were being burnt, where I can talk about it now because I'm 26 years on. Believe me, if you saw me on the Panorama interview I did, I'm a different person today because I have faced the truth and it's set me free. I'm a totally different person than I was being interviewed with Jeffrey Dickens on Panorama. So it's difficult to talk about it, but I don't get as upset now as I used to because obviously I've been campaigning for a long time. I was burnt, made to bend in front of the fire and poked with a poker from the fire on my bottom. And I remember being burnt as a child and never understood why. And now I understand that that branding is a part of Satanism. I was sexually abused, sodomized, oral sex. I was involved in pornography as a child, photographs taken of me, and they used to say that I was the star of the show, and they would say that this was a game and I was the star of the show, even though I didn't like the games that they played. They would drug me because I would remember waking up many mornings and I would just see daddy long legs all over my wallpaper. And I remember thinking, why would I just see daddy long legs all over my wallpaper without a gap in between? And I now know that that's the after effect of hallucinogenic drugs. There was so much secrecy around my whole childhood. There were trigger words that would be said to me that would I now know was hypnosis, where I always had to keep the secret. And funnily enough, I went on a Radio 4 programme that Dennis Wrigley, the leader of the co-founder of the Maranatha community, asked me to go on. And I spoke about satanic ritual abuse on Radio 4. And after the interview, somebody from the BBC rang me because I left my name. I thought there's no point publicly speaking out about it and then not telling people who you are, because how can people ever be helped if you don't leave your name? And somebody from the BBC rang me and said, I believe that I'm involved in something because I keep waking up in the morning and all my feet are dirty and they're scratched and as if I've been through the woods, but I don't even know where I've been. and he wouldn't leave his name. But this is typical of Satanism. Is, you know, we're seeing programs now on television about hypnosis. You know, there's quite a lot of television shows showing hypnosis and people doing absolutely daft things on stage, and then they don't remember a thing about it afterwards. And it's the same thing within Satanism that keeps the mind controlled, so that people don't have any memory of where they've been, but the perpetrators know exactly who comes to the meetings.
Vicky, just if I can just take you back a little bit, when you're talking about this happening to you as a child, how old would you have been?
4.
Right, and so what age did you start to have some awareness as you're growing older as a child? Presumably, at some point, you started to be able to put some of the pieces together in your head. You might not have understood it all, but you started to have an understanding. How old would you have been then?
I always had flashbacks. I always had dreadful dreams, but couldn't piece the jigsaw together. And it was really at the birth of my first son, when I was 25 and I had my first son. That was when the flashbacks and the triggers came in, just horrendous, because to protect my own son, I think that's a mother's instinct, to protect her own child. And that was when I started to seek help in piecing it all together. Right.
You've already said some things which I instantly picked up on, because my very, very limited experience of this subject has simply come about from trying to help and trying to get the truth out about the family courts and children who've been abused in care, and in speaking mainly with mothers, but some fathers as well, and speaking to some of the children in some of the cases that I've dealt with. There has been hints of this type of abuse going on. Now, something I've picked up on very strongly is you use the expression "star of the show." You were told that you were star of the show, and this is the exact expression which the two youngsters, the boy and the girl from the Hampstead abuse case, used. They said that there was another girl in particular in the group of children who were being abused. She did seem to enjoy what she was asked to do, and as a result, they were always telling her that she was the star of the show. And I think they also added that little girl got extra sweets, which was part of the reward system.
Well,
go ahead.
Sorry, Brian.
Yeah. And I just add in this one, and then we'll come back to you. And the other one was the daughter of a particular mother, where the daughter was complaining about a family member giving her fizzy drinks, which she said I didn't particularly like. But then she was talking about remembering being in rooms with where the walls were painted particularly different colours, and she remembers men standing around her. But it was all odd. It was, I don't know whether I dreamt it or it was my imagination. So those are the sort of glimpses that I've had personally from mainly mothers, as I say, who've come forward where their children were being abused. And then within the abuse story, this extra level started to come to the surface. So, sorry, I interrupted you there.
Yes, no, I'm sorry I interrupted you. It reminded me of when I was about 10, winning a fancy dress competition, and I went as Lady Godiva. I was encouraged to go as Lady Godiva with just my knickers on and walk around the room, and I got a huge chocolate bar, big Cadbury's chocolate bar as a reward. So everything, you were rewarded for doing what they wanted you to do.
Right. And so that leads us to a particular point. Now, I know you've got limitations because of pending court cases, but using general descriptions, who was they? Who were these people that were around you and were carrying out this sort of abuse?
Within a coven is usually I think it's 13 members. You will have, the reason that it's covered up is because you will have within a coven a policeman, a gynecologist, a doctor, a lawyer, all, people that are able to cover it up. And that's been my experience of trying to expose satanic ritual abuses. I know that some people who are involved will endeavour to prevent the truth of satanic ritual abuse to be exposed, whereas others are just not equipped to deal with it because it's not yet within their remit. They've no protocols to guide them, as there's not currently anything on the statute books to help them, deal with the subject. And therefore, I think that there needs to be training. I'm sure there is behind the scenes. There's probably training going on for the police, because there must be many victims now with the historical abuse cases coming forward. I'm sure that a lot of those cases will be SRA, and some of the police just, as you say, just won't even believe that it goes on.
Key point there, you've talked about within a coven there being professionals. And this I think is one of the sticking points for many people. They always imagine that if you're talking about the abuse of children and you're talking about dark satanic stuff, it's got to be rather odd, weird people involved, when the truth is, I think, rather different, that you've got people from all sections of society, but you've particularly got people from the professions.
Absolutely. And as I have, obviously, as I have spoken out over the years, I have been threatened. I've been threatened by doctors. I've been threatened by gynecologists. I've been threatened by solicitors. I have been threatened by top psychiatrists. So I know if I'm not talking about anything that's got any substance, there would be absolutely no reason for people to try and silence me. Because if it's not true and you've got nothing to say, then why should people be afraid of you speaking? But there are certainly a lot of people that are afraid of satanic ritual abuse being exposed, because they may not even, some people may not even want to be part of it. But that's the problem with Satanism. It's the grooming that goes on within Satanism, that you get lured in. And, you might have been invited to a meeting, and then you've witnessed you've suddenly a ritual's happening and you've witnessed something, and then you're enslaved to it because nobody's going to believe you. So it's a whole grooming process of being lured into Satanism. Therefore, I think there will be many, many people who would love to have the courage to tell the truth, but they simply, it's far too difficult. People's jobs get threatened. Their life gets threatened. I know what it's cost me over the years to speak out. I'm very grateful that I've stood the course. I'm very grateful and privileged to be sat talking to you today, because I could have ended up in a mental home.
Well, Vicky, it's wonderful to see you on screen. I'm watching you on screen, obviously, and to see you so bright and bouncy talking about this very unpleasant subject. And I'm sure you're right that, of course, the more people who come forward, the more people will come forward. And I
want to encourage people that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I want to encourage people that there is hope and that people can get better. When you say that you never, ever recover, you can recover. And I want people to know that you can, and to encourage people that, but I also believe that prevention's better than cure. It's not all about the therapy afterwards. We need to expose satanic ritual abuse so that it's preventing it happening in the first place.
Yes. I'll just bring in, while it's come into my mind, that of course one of the more recent cases where there is a satanic abuse element in the background is Melanie Shaw from Nottingham.
Yes.
And of course many people who know about the subject would say that one of the reasons that she has had such horrific treatment from the local authorities, that's across the board, the police, the local council's social services, or of course took her child away, was that her abuse was not, you used the phrase at the beginning, sort of normal child abuse. There was also this very dark satanic element with it. Vicky, when you were a child, still a child, did you try and speak out then? And if you did that, what happened? What reaction did you get?
Because so many people were involved, it wouldn't have mattered who I spoke to, because there would have been involvement there. One of the phrases that my perpetrator used very regularly was that if I ever told, I would be in trouble with the police, and that I was special, and that what was happening to me was special, and therefore, you know, you don't want things to ever get any worse than they already are. I cannot begin to tell you the fear attached to speaking out about what's happening to you. You know, even now, I didn't even think I would be nervous, particularly for the interview after so many years, but to recall the actual grip of fear to silence you, only somebody who's come through it can ever explain what that's like.
Yeah. Vicky, one of the other people I was privileged to speak to on this subject was an elderly lady who was up in the Cumbria area. She'd been working for many years with several other ladies trying to rescue girls in particular from satanic cults. And she was one of the first people that started to talk to me, and that was from her personal experience of trying to get the girls out of the cults. These were girls that were being used in the same way you're describing, but they were also breeding babies, which were then being used for satanic practices. And this was one of the things that lady said to me. She said it is so difficult to get the people who are suffering over the thing of fear. And she said that they had one girl in particular that they'd spent many months supporting and encouraging and helping, and that girl wanted to get out of the particular coven, but on the last night or 2 nights before they were going to actually get her and obviously completely move her from that area of the country, she was effectively going to be moved into a new identity. That was the last they heard from her, so they don't know whether there was a leak or something came out. But this is what the lady described as the fear of people.
Can I say that I actually believe that because I have been so open over the years and exposed it, I actually believe that that's protected me even more because I've never hidden it from meeting Jeffrey in the early 1990s, from people where I live, seeing how poorly I was and where I am today. The fact that I have been so open, the fact that I've never, I believe, has helped me to get well, and also given me the support that I've needed. And I have even more support now than ever, because people actually come up to me and say, Vicky, everything that you've been saying is now here. You know, people are talking about it more than we actually think while we're sat here. They're actually wanting something to be done. People are waiting for something to be done.
Yes.
And I believe it will be done. I believe that now this is the time, as I said before, to deal with satanic ritual abuse. And as I've told the police, whether they ever listened to me or they didn't, one day they're going to have to listen, because it will come out.
I'd certainly agree with that. And I think we have seen an amazing step forward, particularly over the last year. Obviously, the information that's been coming into the public domain and mainstream press, as they say, has made a big difference. But you can almost feel it, that it's gone from being totally suppressed and hidden to the fact that people are starting to talk about it, and everyone who speaks about it, there's somebody else coming forward to add their bit. So as a child, you're trapped in fear. You can't actually speak to people. Everywhere you turn, you don't know whether there's another person who's involved with the cult.
Exactly. That's the thing.
That's the way it works.
That's the way it works.
Now, you said, I think you were 25 when your son was born. That's when things started to change for you. What happened then?
The protection for my own child initially, and the need to I remember when I had him thinking, how on earth can I raise this child when I'm still a child myself? The reality that I was fragmented, and that's what happens within within the trauma of satanic ritual abuse, is that, you know, where they've called it multiple personality disorder in the past, now they call it dissociative identity disorder. You've split off. There's fragmented parts where you're still a child in some ways in order to cope. And I knew that I knew I was running. I had so many symptoms, addictions, eating disorder, drinking heavily. I had so many issues that were just symptoms of the abuse. Once I started to deal with what I was running from, the symptoms, I don't have those symptoms today. I don't need to drink. I don't need to escape. I don't have an eating disorder. I don't. And that, to me, it is clear that the truth sets you free, because I've actually dealt with, you know, the roots. You see, so many people just want to deal with the symptoms of things instead of going to the root. And the root was that I was satanically ritually abused as a child. And once I faced the truth, and as traumatic as that was, it was a relief. I can't explain that. Even to face the memories at times, I thought, thank goodness I don't have to carry that around. Thank goodness I don't have to carry that secret around with me anymore. And I even went to my perpetrators and apologised that I'd told. I just said, I just want to get well. I remember early on, and then I thought, what on earth are you doing, Vicky, apologising that you've told? But I was just so desperate to be a decent mother to my own children that I knew that I needed to get well.
Right. So you were able to produce a change in yourself, which helped you move forward.
Yes.
And then when was it that what was the reaction once you started to talk as an adult? You got help from Jeffrey Dickens. Were there other people giving you help? What about all of the charities and the children's charities that say they're there to help?
As I say, Diane Court was a very key factor in helping me. And Dennis Wrigley, I mentioned, the leader of Maranatha, he supported me. And as we know, African ministers come over here to our country to warn the church that witchcraft is very open in their country. But here it's dressed in suits and overalls. So even when I started going to church, African ministers knew what was wrong with me. The way I would react to the word sin within church, the way going up for communion would trigger me, the fear of God that I had a tremendous fear of God, that I was going to be punished, because I remember they used to all they crowded round me with the cloaks on, and you can't see people's faces, you see, when it's dark and the cloaks are over you. Do you see the deception where you can't see who's underneath the cloak? The faces are hidden. But I would hear the word, she sinned, punisher, 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 she sinned. Well, if you can imagine, as a small child, people crowding round you in the dark saying that, she sinned, punisher, punisher. As soon as I found myself in a church and I heard the word sin, people would see me hiding under the pews, because that was a trigger word. And, you know, I want to praise God that African ministers and various ministers who have obviously an understanding of witchcraft knew what was wrong with me, and they helped me to spiritually get free, because that's what it is. It's a spiritual problem. It can't be dealt with. This is, you know, it's no point hiding the fact that the Bible's true. Jesus came to destroy the works of the devil, and how do you deal with witchcraft? You know, it's Jesus who deals with witchcraft. And I had deliverance ministry, and healing, and that's why I'm where I am today, and I just continue to tell the truth of how I've got through it.
Vicky, this is, of course, this is the key area with this. What is going on is a spiritual battle. That's something
Absolutely.
that I
Absolutely.
totally believe in. And in all the troubles we see around us today, there comes a point where to get a solution for that, we have to get back on looking at matters through spiritual eyes and working in that way. So I'm totally on board with you over that. It's very interesting that you talk about African ministers. This is something, again, I've heard of before. There was a few years ago an African minister that had come down to Plymouth, and he gave a series of talks and conducted ministry in some of the Plymouth churches. But that was part of his story of being absolutely astonished to see shops full of things that he directly equated as witchcraft symbology and witchcraft items.
Yes.
And he was amazed that in this so-called educated country, people had so little understanding of things that they were bringing into their homes.
Absolutely.
Or indeed office spaces.
Yes.
So that was a very, very interesting man. I'm going to say that when I initially approached churches to try and get them to understand some of the more political things that were happening in the country, I got rejected by churches more than any other places, which I found very interesting. There were individuals who gave me support and were interested to hear what I was talking about. But my overall recollection of going for help amongst the Christian churches, certainly in my local area, were a rather arrogant dismissal. And what was you've talked about African ministers, and I take from that you've had special support from them. But what about the reaction from the established church, the Church of England, for example?
I think they're learning. I think the church is waking up to the reality of spiritual warfare, and it needs to. But yes, I think some ministers struggled with me, but I definitely think that there is a change coming where vicars and ministers are understanding, because that's the ministry of the gospel. His deliverance is part of the ministry that Jesus indeed cast out demons and people that were oppressed and in bondage. And I found it very hard at first. I would say, going back to first going to church, especially when I'd had no understanding of Christianity at all, I couldn't understand why people were afraid. So that made me even more afraid, because I thought, well, if your God's bigger than the God I grew up with, then how come you're afraid? So I would encourage Christians to really know the power of the gospel and that the victories won at Calvary, and to really read the word of God and know who they are in Christ, because I met a lot of Christians that were very, very afraid and still are, but they are waking up to the reality of spiritual warfare.
Okay, I'm going to come back onto that in a minute, if I may. Just following through the progress. So you eventually are telling your story as an adult, and you've been able to re-engage the police. Now, I know you're going to be very limited in what you could say at this, but how were you able to get the police to re-engage in your particular case when before it had been totally closed down?
It's difficult to answer that one because of what the perpetrators were actually planning to do. As I say, the issues, because people know I've spoken out, it tends to come to me rather than me going to it. And somebody posted me a newspaper article through my door. And because of this step that the perpetrators were making, I was able to go back to the police and say, you really need to listen, because if you don't close this door, there is a serious problem. But because of legal reasons, I can't discuss what that was. Right.
Okay, I understand that. I won't take you anywhere that's difficult. Just to say, previously you've said one of the great difficulties is that when you talk to the police or other people, you don't know who may be a Satanist themselves.
Yes.
You obviously had the courage to go back to the police, more or less saying to them, you need to do something. How did you get over that hurdle that there could still be policemen who could get involved in the investigation, who could be Satanists? How did you get around that hurdle?
I think because, and I need to be totally truthful about my journey, it was an African lady. I've shared this with the police myself. An African lady came up to me in church and said, you need to do what God's told you. You need to go back 20 years and do what God's told you to do. And I remember at the time thinking, oh, for goodness sake, have I got to go back and deal with something in my childhood again? And I recognised at that time that 20 years previously was when I'd first gone to the police. And so I can only share my journey that I stepped out because I believe God called me to step out. And because I know He's called me to step out, that's why I'm not afraid, because I know He's with me. And I did go back to the police. And as I say, each door that He's told me to walk through has opened, and they are being educated. Even as we speak, I believe that the police are being educated in this area and equipped. And I will always like to think there are more good men than bad men. So let's not see everybody as a Satanist either. I think we have to get the balance so that there's no scaremongering and, that everybody you see is a Satanist. I will still believe that, yes, evil only prospers when good men do nothing, but there are still a lot of good men. And I want to encourage the police that work very hard and are trying to do something about it. I want to encourage them to carry on, because I believe that breakthrough will come.
Vicky, just fantastic what you're saying. And while you're talking, and I'm thinking about the police, a couple of years ago I was invited to a private meeting in one of the committee rooms up in Westminster, and there were several police present at the meeting. And I think it was a policeman and a policewoman gave a description of how they investigated and brought to trial and secured convictions on the satanic abuse amongst a family in South Wales. And I think they were very brave police, and they talked about the difficulties they'd encountered in the case, but also said that once they really understood what was going on and what the children had gone through, they weren't going to let it drop. There was also a retired police lady in that room who talked about, with a colleague, going around every police district in UK, and I think there's about 43 of them, in order to find out about child abuse. And then she was describing how when they produced a report that there was abuse on a much, much greater scale than they'd realised, their report was simply shut down, and as she said, it disappeared into the safe of my boss and never saw the light of day again. So these good policemen and women are out there, and I'd also like...
They need encouraging.
They need encouraging. We've also had another one that Mike Robinson and I sat with a few weeks ago, talking about investigations into child abuse in London, what the particular police officer had done, and then the fact that senior police and indeed politicians had worked with some of the top charities, I won't mention names of those, but some of the top children's charities, to shut down the investigations into the abuse of children. So you've gone through on faith, that is the thing that allows you to open doors and shed some of the fear.
Yes.
I'm afraid I can't remember the exact title of it, and we've hammered the BBC a bit, quite rightly. But I believe on YouTube there's a BBC documentary about witchcraft from the mid-1970s, which I've watched a couple of times, and that's not a bad place for people to start. The reason I bring it in now is that towards the end, a lady who has escaped from a coven, much as yourself, says, well, of course, the thing people need to know is that the Satanists are very frightened of people who are not frightened of them. And also prayer has an immense power, and that Satanists are very, very frightened of prayer.
Demons tremble at the name of Jesus.
Right, and that is something that a lot of the national press scoffs at when people start to talk about how you counter some of these very powerful and dark forces. Of course, if we mention proper faith, of course, this is met with great scorn because it's actually frightening the opposition.
And also, it's about revelation. You know, I've had more revelation over the years as I've walked with the Lord. So you know, you can't expect people to be where they're not. We're all on a journey, and you know, it is part of the journey that people will eventually, you know, it will be brought out into the open, and people will understand. And it is horrendous, but we almost see now people are anaesthetized to evil, you know, oh, another murder, oh, another rape, oh, another, you know, people's hearts are becoming hardened, and that's in scripture in Hebrews. They're becoming hardened, and it even, you know, hardened by sin's deceitfulness. And it even says in the Gospels, doesn't it, that because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold, and we're actually living in those days. So, you know, it is a matter of deception being exposed, and that's exactly what's happening. Deception is being exposed as we speak.
That's brilliant, Vicky. Just one question. In your experience of Satanism, were you given any indication, or did you get any feel for sort of how big the satanic culture is across this country? This is one of the things that a lot of people, of course, get very frightened. They think if they step outside the door, is that person a Satanist? Can you give us any idea of what we're talking about as say, a percentage of people who might be involved in this?
I think it is. I think it's very, very big, but I think that it is growing because it's allowed to grow, because it's not exposed. And I come back to the point that I said about grooming, about recruiting people into Satanism. I mean, I wanted to come back to that point earlier on. We see the increase of the occult on the television. We see, you know, as you mentioned about African ministers, voodoo dolls are being sold in shopping malls. You know, holistic. I'm a beauty therapist, and we see that through holistic therapies, Eastern religion practices are coming through into beauty therapy. And it's time the church should lead the world, not the world lead the church. The church needs to be a voice. So that people don't walk into, you know, my people died through lack of knowledge, and people are walking through doors that they don't even know that they shouldn't be walking through. And this is where people need to be taught, because how do you know if nobody ever informs you? And, you know, when you talk, which I find astonishing, is when you discuss the Ouija board, if you actually say to somebody, oh, have you ever used the Ouija board? People go, oh, no. So they know that witchcraft's real because of the Ouija board. And yet when you actually talk about satanic ritual abuse, they find it hard to believe. And yet everybody watches ghosts programs, and there's more, you know, there's far more occult films now than there ever used to be. And our children, which is Satan's assignment, our children are being anaesthetized to evil. And we're living in the days where it says, woe to those who call good evil and evil good. And we are living in those days. And I believe that Satanism can only grow as long as it's not exposed. But it is our job to expose it. And again, give people an opportunity who don't really want to be involved. I know there are people that, as you've said, they're involved and they don't even want to be involved, but there's nowhere to go to be able to come out. And the church needs to welcome those people to come out and to help them and to restore them and to set them free.
Vicky, I was going to ask you what we did about this, and you've summed that up in such a it's perfect, because you've just run straight into the fact that as we learn about this and know about it, we have to do something about it and speaking out. So you've covered the point of not only must we do something, how we do it. I'm going to say I think you've brought us to a fantastic conclusion. I would like to ask for another opportunity to talk to you, because I have so many questions, things I've been writing while you've been talking to me. I think there's a lot more that we could discuss, and perhaps in doing that, this would help the process of bringing other people to the fore. So we can talk separately on that. But I'm going to say thank you very much for having the courage to come on live and tell us about yourself and your experiences as an SRA survivor. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much for inviting me, and it's been a privilege to be on your programme. And I just thank you that you are speaking out. Bless you. Thank you.
Well, I can only do that, Vicky, with the support of a lot of other people, so that's the good side. Okay,
thank
well,
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, that was Vicky Ash with us talking about SRA, and I'm sure that we're going to be having further programmes on this very, very important subject. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.